Welcome to the NT podcast. I am Nemanja Juršić, and in today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Michael Huemer, professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado and one of the leading contemporary defenders of moral realism, metaphysical libertarianism, substance dualism, reincarnation, and many more. Dr. Huemer, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for your time and willingness to talk on my channel. So we have a lot to cover. So let's start right away with our topic. So Professor Huemer, moral realism. How would you prove that there are some objective moral truths, values, duties, or anything like that?
Well, basically, I consider the alternative views. Okay, so there are basically three alternative views. Now, I first have to say something about what we mean by objective values. Okay, so objective means basically independent of the attitudes of observers. So, murder is wrong. Is that objective? Well, the question is it wrong independent of how the observers feel about murder? Okay, or is it only wrong because we dislike it or we don't want people to do it or whatever? Okay. So there are three alternatives to the existence of objective evaluative facts. All right. One is that all evaluative statements are false. Okay. So murder isn't wrong. Right. So then it would not be an objective fact. Okay. The second alternative is, well, they could be true, but their truth depends upon the attitudes of observers. So maybe murder is wrong just means that society disapproves of it. Or maybe it's wrong just means that I, the speaker who I'm saying that is wrong, disapprove of it, dislike it, or whatever. Okay. So the first alternative that, it's not wrong and nothing is wrong, that's known as nihilism, also known as error theory. The second alternative is known as subjectivism or relativism. Okay, like it's true, but its truth depends on the observer's attitudes. The third alternative is that it could be neither true nor false. And this is generally said because maybe the statement murder is wrong isn't really an assertion. Maybe you're not really making any claim about how the world is. Maybe you're doing a different kind of speech act, like you're just trying to stop people from committing murder. Okay, so it's kind of like a command, or maybe you're just expressing your negative feelings about it. Okay, so compare if I say don't murder. So that's not a statement. So it's neither true nor false. It's a command. Okay. Or suppose if I say murder, boo. Okay. So that's not a statement. So that's neither true nor false. Okay. So maybe the sentence murder is wrong, even though it looks like an assertion. Maybe its meaning is really the same as boo on murder or something like that. Okay. And so then I would just argue against each of these three alternatives. Okay. And you should see that these are the only three alternatives, right? So if you agree that moral statements are sometimes true and their truth doesn't depend on the attitudes of observers, then that is moral realism. Then you're saying there are objective moral truths. Okay. So I mean, it's kind of a long answer. I'd have to say why each of these three alternatives are bad theories, right? Why should you not think that all moral statements are false? Well, it seems like murder is wrong. And if you say that that's false, that's just like such an implausible thing that, like, I don't know how you could have any philosophical premises that are more obvious than, it's wrong to kill people for fun or something like that. So, like, I don't know how somebody would argue that it's not true, that you shouldn't kill people for fun. Okay. I don't know how somebody could have an argument that was more compelling than just the thing that they're trying to deny. What's wrong with subjectivism? Well, true or false? If I like murder, then it's okay to murder. That's false. That's just like obviously false. Everybody who understands morality understands that that's not how it works, right? It's not that you get out of obligations if you stop disapproving of things. Okay, what if you live in a society where, the society approves of killing people? It's like you live in Nazi Germany and, the society is supporting sending the Jews to concentration camps. Okay. In that situation, should you help to send the Jews to concentration camps? And almost everybody knows that the correct answer is no, right? So it looks like your obligations are not dependent on the attitudes of society. They're not just dependent on your own attitudes. Okay. And you have the third alternative, like, oh, maybe they're neither true nor false because they're not really making assertions. Okay. And this is generally refuted by you just take sentences. So the theory explains simple statements like murder is wrong, but it doesn't explain more complex statements in which the evaluation is embedded in a larger statement. Okay. So I could say something like, if it's wrong to kill people, then it's also wrong to pay somebody to kill people. Or in general, if doing something is wrong, then paying other people to do it is also wrong. Okay, what does that mean? And the thing is, you can't make sense of that because if murder is wrong isn't a statement, then if murder is wrong, then such and such is wrong doesn't make sense, right? Like if A, then B, like it requires statements to go in for A and B. Okay. And also like, if murder is wrong means something like boo on murder, what does if doing something is wrong, then paying somebody to do that thing is wrong mean, right? Because there's no thing that you're expressing negative emotions about when you say if doing something's wrong. You're not against doing something, right? Okay, so anyway, yeah, so the best defense of moral realism is to just look at what is implausible about all the alternative views.
Okay, I like your approach. Thank you so much. So now, some say that our moral intuitions and judgments can be fully explained by evolutionary psychology, that we have certain moral impulses because they helped our ancestors to survive and cooperate. So would that explain why we think that it's morally wrong to kill people from one?
Um, it's sort of and sort of not, right? Like, so you can come up with evolutionary explanations for virtually everything, right? So like you can come up with explanations for morality in the same way that you could come up with explanations for anything that happened. Okay, so um, but could you come up with explanations that you would have anticipated before you knew what our actual moral beliefs were? No, probably not. Okay. So, you learn from evolutionary theory that evolution selects for selfishness. This is what you learn if you read great books like The Selfish Gene. Okay. Basically, okay, the group selection model is wrong. Evolution does not select for behaviors that benefit the group, right? It selects for behaviors that benefit the individual, or more specifically, that benefit the particular gene that's being selected. So the genes tend to predominate in the population when that gene causes individuals who have that gene to produce more copies of it. Okay. So now if you just understand that, then what you would anticipate from people's moral values is you would think that everyone should be an ethical egoist. Right. Now, ethical egoism is a view in ethics that the right thing to do is always the thing that most serves your own interests. So you'd expect that people to have something like that view, or maybe, even more, you'd expect them to have the view that the good is reproduction. That everybody's, main goal in life should be to produce as many offspring as possible. Nobody holds that view. And very few people hold ethical egoism. And most people think that egoism is like a complete non-starter. Okay. So, like, the thing that you would most likely expect if an evolutionary account of our moral beliefs were correct is pretty close to the opposite of what people actually think. That's not to say that you can't then come up with some explanation for why it wouldn't be what you would initially expect. Okay. But then that just kind of shows that it's like an unfalsifiable theory. Like, you can come up with some story for how evolution could select almost anything, right? But we don't have the thing that you would most naturally expect, right? So you can't sort of like, unless you are already somehow independently committed to thinking that it's got to be evolution, that morality has to be an adaptation, there's not any obvious reason for thinking that it is.
Okay, so where morality come from? Because William Craig would say, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Would you agree with that?
No, that's close to the opposite of the truth. Um, no, I mean, it's not the opposite of the truth. I mean, objective moral values can coexist with God, but William Lane Craig's view is not a moral realist view. Okay. It is not embracing objective values. It's a subjectivist view because his view and the view of these other, divine command theorists is that morality depends on the attitudes of God. Okay, God is an interesting special observer, but he's an observer. So it's holding that moral values depend on the attitudes of the observer. So it's holding that they're not objective. Okay, now we moral realists believe, like The hardcore, robust moral realists think that morality is objective in a strong sense. It's independent of the attitudes of any observers, including God. Okay, now some of these religious divine command theorist thinkers, I think they just cannot comprehend that that's anybody's view. Like they're such deeply committed subjectivists that they cannot comprehend what an actual moral realist view is. So they don't realize that that's actually the view, right? So like they don't understand, like, well, they're like, but where could morality come from? To me, that's a bizarre question. It's like asking where the number two comes from, right? Or, so the fact that it's wrong to cause suffering for no reason, or, to cause suffering to others just for the fun of it, where does that fact come from? That's like asking where the fact that two is less than three comes from. I have no idea what that means. That's like, okay. But I think the reason, and nobody asks that question. Nobody asks, where does two is less than three come from? Right. But that's because most people are realists about math. Okay. But then somehow they think that morality is very different. And I don't know why. I don't know why anyone thinks that it's sensible to ask where the moral truths come from, right? When they don't ask that about other necessary truths, right?
Right. Wouldn't you say that if moral realism is true, then it would raise probability for theism? Because if God created and ordered the cosmos, arranging it such that we as rational beings can apprehend non-physical entities like moral norms, that would be strange, right? Richard Swinburne would put that argument. What do you think?
Well, okay, so it's not simply the existence of moral truths, but our ability to perceive them or our ability to know the moral truths. Is that evidence for theism? It's probably a small amount of evidence for theism, right? Like it's probably more likely that we would have that capacity if there's a God than if there isn't. The reason for that being that I suppose it's good that we're able to perceive the moral truths. That causes us to behave better than we would if we couldn't perceive the moral truths. So that's good. So there's evidence for theism in the way that everything good is evidence for theism. At the same time, bear in mind that everything bad is evidence against theism by the same token for the same reason, right? So, okay. So, overall, it's not a huge amount. Now, you might think, okay, but, is it a lot more likely or a little bit more likely that we would have moral knowledge if there was a God? That sort of like depends upon your understanding of how moral knowledge works. Okay, so if you think that human beings have a completely separate cognitive faculty for perceiving moral truths and only moral truths, right? Then that's a bit odd. Theism starts to look like an explanation for why we have that faculty, or you start looking at evolution, like why would evolution select for that faculty, and then you're like not completely clear why it would. Okay, but that isn't the view of most contemporary moral realists. Most contemporary moral realists think that we have a general capacity for understanding necessary truths, for understanding abstract objects, and so, the way that you're able to do mathematics is that you're able to grasp certain abstract objects, certain abstractions. Like the number three is an abstraction. It's an abstract object. And because you're able to understand what it is, you're able to understand what threeness is, or, the property of being triple or whatever. Because you're able to understand that, then you can also understand how it relates to other things, like that it's more than two, right? Or understand properties of it like that it's prime. Okay. And I think most contemporary moral realists believe that, moral properties are also abstract objects, which we can grasp through the same cognitive faculty, through a general capacity for understanding natures of abstract objects. And thereby you can understand necessary truths about them. That enjoyment is better than suffering. So that's a necessary truth. If you understand the nature of enjoyment and you understand what suffering is, and you understand what goodness is, then you just inherently have to understand that enjoyment is better than suffering. Right. So okay. So like we didn't have to have. Okay. So like it's not on this view. It's not weird that you can understand moral truths, right? And like given that you could understand other abstract objects, it's not weird.
Okay, that's why I like your approach because you simply don't care if that's evidence for God or against God, so you are good with both. So, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
how would you answer? How would you respond to the argument from disagreement? Many philosophers argue that the widespread moral disagreement undermines moral realism, and that shows that morality is subjective.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that I think the amount of disagreement is exaggerated. Some of the apparent moral disagreement is factual disagreement. So you take issues like whether abortion is morally wrong. Is it wrong to abort a fetus? And that could be partly a moral disagreement, but it's also partly a factual disagreement. So part of the reason why people disagree about that is people disagree about whether fetuses have souls. So many, maybe most, like maybe the vast majority of the people who are against abortion think that a fetus has a soul, that the soul enters the body like at the moment of conception or sometime very early during the pregnancy, and the people who are against abortion think that that does not happen. Okay, so it's partly a matter of factual disagreement. Um, and by the way, like nobody says that that shows that there aren't any facts about souls. There's disagreement about whether we have a soul and when it enters the body, if it does. Nobody says that means that there's no objective fact about whether you have a soul or not, right? So like it's a little bit odd that people say that about moral disagreements that they don't say about other kinds of disagreements. The other thing that we should think about is there's been a lot of disagreement in history over moral questions as well as other kinds of questions. But also, societies have tended to converge over history on many different things, including moral values. Okay, so the values of people today are different from the values that they had thousands of years ago. And around the world, people's values have shifted in a certain pretty consistent direction, right? Which is that they shifted towards liberalization, right? So, like, slavery was widely practiced in many societies throughout human history around the world. Okay, but then it started to get banned like in the 1800s. And then from there, the prohibition on slavery spread throughout the entire world. So it is now illegal in every country in the world. Okay, so now if moral disagreement is evidence for anti-realism, then moral convergence should be evidence for realism. And I think like you have to accept both of those. You have to accept the second thing if you accept the first thing. Okay, so then first you notice that there was divergence among societies throughout history, but then you notice that we're converging over time, which is what you would expect if there were objective facts, right? Which, by the way, is what happens in the sciences. So people started out with, a diversity of completely incorrect scientific theories about where the Earth came from, about where life came from, the causes of diseases and things like this. Okay. And then over time, people around the world have converged towards more adequate, correct theories about all of those things. Okay. So, what you would expect about morality, if there are moral facts, is that people would start out with a diversity of completely incorrect views about morality, and then they would slowly converge over time, which is what has happened.
Okay, thank you so much. So, would you say that the convergence of most philosophers today, most of them accept that moral realism is true? I think by the field paper. So there is a consensus. Does that point to the fact that maybe there are some objective truths and values?
Yeah. So, what you just referred to is there was a survey of the opinions of philosophers, the Phil Papers survey. So, if you go to philpapers.org, I think you can navigate around and find the survey results. They asked philosophers a whole bunch of interesting philosophical questions to see what the opinions were. And I think moral realism was a plurality view. I don't know if it was an absolute majority, but a lot of people say don't know, no opinion, or other, or something like that. So anyway, and then various different forms of anti-realism. But I think moral realism was a plurality view. I wouldn't say it's a consensus because there's a lot of disagreement among philosophers. And it's really hard to get philosophers to agree. Okay. But yes, that is evidence that that's the correct view, right? It's at least some evidence. Of course, philosophers could be wrong, so it's not conclusive. It's some evidence, but it's not super strong evidence because the majority of philosophers have been wrong before. But it's hard to see how this could not be evidence in favor of the view, right? So these are generally high IQ people. They're generally smarter than most people, and also they're generally um, informed, better informed than ordinary people. So intelligent, if the thinking of intelligent, well-informed people who had a lot of time to think about a question is not at all an indicator of what's true, then you should just give up thinking about anything, if that's what you think, right? Because right? Because if you're saying that the views of these people are not evidence for what's true, then what you're saying is like even the people who are in the best position to find out the truth are not any better at finding out the truth than, random chance, in which case everybody should just give up. Like nobody, and you shouldn't bother thinking about it either because, why would you be any more reliable?
Yes, let me add, according to the 2020 Phil Papers survey, a majority of philosophers, approximately 62.1%, accept or lean toward
Hmm.
moral realism. So in
Good, good.
2009, it was 56%. So there is
Hmm.
a
Increased.
increase, yeah.
Good. Yeah. Okay. So increasing over time is even better, even better evidence. Yeah. So, yeah. What's the best explanation for that? Um, the most straightforward explanation is that these philosophers looked at the arguments, and they're smart people. They looked at the arguments. They saw that the arguments for moral realism are pretty good, and the arguments against it are not that good. That's probably what happened, right?
Or they just follow your view. So maybe
Yeah.
that's the.
Probably, a lot of philosophers read my book, Ethical Intuitionism. Yeah.
Yes.
Like all the viewers should go and get that book now.
Okay. Right. So John Mackey argued that if objective moral values existed, they would be queer entities, strange kinds of facts, unlike anything else in the natural world. Would you agree with him?
Oh, that they're strange? I don't know. So I don't know what kind of property strangeness is or queerness, as he called it, right? Um, and people don't like to call it queer anymore. They call it weird or strange or mysterious. So I don't know if that's even an objective property at all, and I don't know if strangeness is um, evidentially relevant. Okay, so first, so I don't know if strangeness exists, but if it does, is that evidence for anything? So maybe moral properties are strange. Okay, and maybe he just means that they're very different from other things. So what? Okay, so they're different. A lot of things are different from a lot of other things. Okay, time is strange when you think about it. Time is different from anything else that we think exists. But like nobody thinks that, oh, so then we should deny that time exists. No, like there's just different kinds of things. I don't know. And consciousness is strange compared to physical things. But it exists and whatever, space is kind of strange. Matter and energy is strange. I don't know. Like just there are many different kinds of things in reality that are very different from all the other things. So it's like I'm not really bothered by that.
Yes, a great answer. Thank you again. Now, anti-realists often draw an analogy between moral and aesthetic judgments. People disagree about beauty, yet we still talk as if there are objective facts about it. Isn't morality similar, just another domain where we talk as if there are facts, even though it's really a matter of taste or cultural conditioning?
So this objection presupposes that there are no facts about beauty. And I guess I feel like I need an argument for that. Like, why should we not just accept that there are objective facts about beauty? Um, okay, now I think there could be maybe more compelling variants on this objection. Like, you could come up with other properties where it's going to be less controversial, right? Okay, so funniness. Are there objective facts about funniness? Like that's a bit harder, a bit harder to accept. Funniness is objective. Um, And so, yeah, what would we say about that? I would be like, well, maybe a subjectivist theory of funniness is correct. And it doesn't seem as unacceptable to me. Okay, so somebody says, you know what? If most of society approved of torturing babies, then you should torture babies. if you live in such a society, you should torture babies. That sounds to me very wrong and like unacceptable. Like that is not a plausible thing to accept. Okay, but if somebody says like, well, if you're in a society where, um, you know, nobody laughs at Louis C.K., then Louis C.K. isn't funny. Okay, so like that doesn't strike me as an unacceptable judgment. Like that, I don't have a problem accepting that in the way that I do the thing about murder. Like, oh, if we didn't disapprove of murder, it wouldn't be wrong anymore. Um, you see what I mean? So, yeah, it may be that when you say something is funny, then you're just saying something about people's reactions to it. But I don't think when you say something is wrong or shouldn't be done, that you're just saying something about our reactions.
Do you have an example what is objectively beautiful to everyone, maybe?
Um, well, the way that you phrase that is you said objectively beautiful, but then you said to everyone. So then that makes it sound like you're assuming that it's not objective. So like if some right, because like nobody says this thing is square to me. Like shape is an objective property, right? So nobody talks about and they don't think that being objectively square means being square to everyone. They just think it's square anyway. So as I
Yeah,
said,
you're right.
okay,
Yeah, thank you.
but okay, but so and it's important to see that like that doesn't mean that everyone will recognize it. Okay, so like there are people who don't recognize the moral truths, and that doesn't make them not objectively true. It just makes those people deficient. So like the psychopaths don't perceive moral truths, but they're still real. It's just that the psychopaths are deficient in whatever, cognitively deficient, right? Unable to perceive the truth. Okay, so anyway, like, are there things that are beautiful? Like, so there could be people who don't see the beautiful things as beautiful. So like, your cat will probably not appreciate Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Presumably, the cat can still hear the same sounds, but it's not going to perceive the beauty. But okay, but it is beautiful. Okay, so anyway, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is a great piece of music, even if there are people or cats who can't appreciate it. It's still beautiful.
What about taste and food preferences? Most people might agree that pizza tastes better than broccoli, for example, but that's just a widespread preference, not an objective truth. So,
Yeah, is tastiness objective? Tastiness probably refers to the capacity of a food to cause pleasure in the observer who's eating it or something like that. Um, so well, when people have different tastes in food, it's not totally clear what's going on. So, like, there's somebody who enjoys broccoli and there's somebody who doesn't enjoy broccoli. It's not clear why. Okay, so it could be that um, they're having different sensations, right? So, um, the person who enjoys it, like it's correct that the sensations they're having are enjoyable. And the person who doesn't like it, they're having different sensations, which are not enjoyable. And so they can both be correct, right? So it could be tasty for the one person, not tasty for the other. And like it's not hard to understand what that means, right? That it's causing pleasure for one, but not the other. Hey, now, you could say something similar about beauty, like maybe being beautiful means causing a certain kind of pleasure, would be a different kind of pleasure, not exactly sensory pleasure. Like that's a possible theory of beauty. It's not obvious, like whether that's an adequate theory or not. Okay, but about morality, it's like I think it clearly doesn't mean that. Like something being morally good doesn't mean that it causes pleasure. Um, in the observer who thinks about the person performing that action or whatever.